Ladies and gentlemen, I'm tremendously honored to welcome you all today to this next episode of Pathways. Today I have with me Mr. Ear, Dr. Engineer, Dr. Shawn Tan, the president of the Oxford and Cambridge Society of Malaysia. It's an absolute pleasure to have you with us today. Thank you so much for appearing on this podcast.
Very good morning to you as well, Victor, and thanks for inviting me over.
It is a really fascinating life that you have right there. I've seen like interviews basically of you where you talk about AI. You are essentially a speaker at a bunch of different events where you've been talking about like things like microprocessors, the 5 different microprocessors that you created like during the course of your life, I think. And you essentially got, if I'm not wrong, your PhD at Cambridge University, was it not?
Yes, correct. That's
Wow,
PhD.
okay. And even after getting that PhD from Cambridge, you subsequently went on to the University of Malaya where you got a degree in law.
That's true as well. Correct.
Oh my goodness, like how do you do it? What is it that motivates you to go on this constant intellectual quest?
Well, for me personally, I've always been someone who likes to learn.
Mhm.
So I like learning things
Yeah.
ever since I was young, right?
Mhm.
Now, so of course I went to normal school, like national school, private school, secondary school,
Mhm.
right? And then I started dabbling in computers at a very young age,
Mhm.
and that's mainly due to my parents, right? So they introduced me to computers. They have no idea what computers are, but my mom sort of knew that this was something fancy and new. So
Wow.
let's give it a try. Might be useful for my son, right? So I attended some classes in the beginning for about 3 months, and then I stopped because by then I realized I knew more than the instructor, and so then I started learning on my own. Right? So everything I've known about computers is effectively, I would say, 99% self-taught. Right? So I've always been the kind of person who learns. I like learning.
That's fascinating.
Yeah. So then I went on that journey down the software path, and then when I finished my SPM, I was like, by then I had probably like about, I don't know, 8 years, 9 years of programming experience. And so I was like, okay, I want to know more about how the hardware works.
Mhm.
The software is software, great, but hardware also plays a big role. So that's why I decided to go into electronics. And then that journey brought me all the way to a PhD in chip design because I wanted to really know how things work all the way down until silicon, right, until devices.
Right.
So that's that path that reached to Cambridge. My PhD is in chip design at the University of Cambridge. And so nowadays I like to tell people when in the tech industry they have this jargon called full stack engineer. The full stack they only talk about front end, back end software. I tell them full stack is down to silicon. That's the real full stack. Okay, it's not just the front end, back end. And then why I did the law degree after that was also still interest. I didn't do it for any professional reason. I have no interest in becoming a lawyer, but I had an interest, and I've always had this little interest in how things work. So the law is, in a way, the operating system of society.
Mhm.
So I'm trying to understand a little bit of how things work, especially in Malaysia, and so I decided to do law just to pick it up.
You know, it's fascinating because what I am seeing here, correct me if I'm wrong, is a sort of like break almost between the self-learning phase of your life, just based on what you had described to me. So you had initially decided to self-learn various aspects of computers and various things of that nature, reaching a high level of proficiency before you eventually went on to pursue formal education. So then, in your view, I guess, what is the importance of formal education and what did it provide in your life that would not have otherwise transpired in an alternate reality where Dr. Shawn had not gone on and become Dr. Shawn?
Okay, there are two things that I've learned through my journey.
Mhm.
All right. Number one, from the more localized Asian mentality context, a paper degree is still very important. Right. No matter how good you are, if you don't have that piece of paper to sell you, then it's a bit hard to sell. All right. So that's one of the reasons why I did. I even though I've learned it already, I still continue to pursue the paper qualifications. Right. So that's one perspective. The other perspective is that by self-learning things, there are often a lot of gaps. And I also discovered this as I go along. There are a lot of gaps in the knowledge because the learning is not structured. It's very ad hoc. You jump here, jump there. And keep in mind that this is not today. I started programming in the late 80s, right? So no internet, no stuff like that, right? So no YouTube videos, no Coursera, no, don't have stuff like that. So literally, it's very, very patchy,
Yeah.
right? It's holes everywhere.
Oh yeah.
So pursuing something like a formalized degree or something that helps to provide structure and also to fill in those gaps, right? So that is something that is also very useful.
When we think about, say, paper qualifications, it's fascinating. Because when we think about the modern paradigm of education, and perhaps you've seen this, like in your capacity of president of the Oxford Cambridge Society, people apply maybe to universities, right? Um, in maybe fewer numbers than might be expected because they are worried about the escalating costs of higher education. And in this sort of paradigm right here, so people then, start thinking about things like, for example, oh, maybe we can do an online course to sort of, address these kinds of issues right here. And when you think about that and technology in the modern age, like, do you feel that maybe paper qualifications, have in some sense lost their luster as the time of our universe has progressed forward per Eddington's arrow of time? Or do you feel that, paper qualifications will forever remain relevant?
I think it depends on how you see paper qualifications. All right. In my opinion, paper qualifications are not a substitute for actual skills. All right. In other words, it's not you go and learn, let's say, a trade or skill, and then you skip the qualification. After all, you can do the work anyway, right? Or people who go and do the paper qualification, but then only study what's in the book. They don't actually have any practical experience doing stuff. I don't think it's actually a substitute. I actually think that they are both required. Why? Because again, if you pick things up, like let's say trade school or something like or you pick things up along the way in like on the job training, on the job experience, there are always going to be limits to what you can learn because the focus is very different. The focus when you do like say on the job training is to get the thing done, right? So you don't necessarily understand the theoretical foundations that underpin what you are trying to do. Whereas the paper qualification is often on the opposite end of the spectrum. They are very focused on the theoretical foundations and maybe less so on the how you apply it, right? So I actually think that both of these things are complementary. You actually need both. Otherwise, if you just know how to do something but you don't know why, then your potential for growth there is also stunted because you will probably at some point encounter certain things that are not standard, and then you may struggle to figure out how to get this thing done. Or even if you figure it out, you may not know why it works. It's like, okay, it works, okay lah, enough lah, but I have no idea why it works. Okay, so it's a bit of both lah. I see. So I always think that the paper qualification is also still important. Now, whether or not this qualification comes in the form of a formal university degree, that's a separate issue, right? Especially like you mentioned, nowadays we have a lot of options, right? Some people can attend short courses, micro degrees, there are all kinds of things out there, lah, right? So in that sense of certifications and things like that, right? So in that sense, that part I'm not too hung up on. It has to come from a university, for example, but I still feel that is important.
Fascinating. Thank you for that. So then, I'd like to then draw you back a little in time then, to the time when you were considering this paper qualification. As perhaps you were considering the range of universities, perhaps a whole stream of different possibilities had opened up right there. Perhaps you could have gone to Harvard in an alternate reality, maybe to Stanford, maybe to Oxford, the eternal rival of your alma mater, so to speak. Of course, you guys are good friends right now, judging by the fact that you are president of the Oxbridge Society. But of all the possible places that you could have gone to, what led you towards Cambridge, and what do you think are some of the, feelings, I guess, that you have about that experience?
Okay, my journey to Cambridge is not so straightforward and not so conventional, right? So after I finished my degree, I actually got a scholarship to study overseas, all right? And then I had to go and apply for places, right? And I have never ever considered applying to these top universities. Never.
Never.
All right, never. Because honestly, I felt I was like, okay lah, I'm good lah, but jago kampung ni mah, right? Am I that good lah, right? Okay. So I actually didn't even think about it. These
Yeah.
things weren't even on my radar,
Yeah,
right? Except that my scholarship funder,
yeah,
they sat me down and told me to try.
yeah.
They said they were like, they told me that from their experience, right, it's like, I'm good enough, go for it. What's the worst that could happen? The worst that could happen is just get a rejection, nothing, right? So just give it a go. Some more, they were the ones paying for all the applications. So it was like, okay lah, just apply whatever lah. Apply 100 universities if you want to, right?
Okay.
So I had to come up with a list. They asked me to come up with a list of the top universities in the field that I was interested to pursue
Yes.
in the US, in the UK, and a few other places as well. Come up with a list and then sit down with them and then figure it out, and then we'll pick some and we apply, right? So in my case, I decided to skip the US.
Yeah.
That was a personal choice, purely because there are more guns than people there. So I was like, okay, not very safe lah. I don't feel very safe. Okay, alright, so skip it lah. Alright.
Okay.
So I didn't bother to, although I took my GRE, but I didn't bother to like apply for any of the
Yeah.
US universities. Okay, I pretended to, I didn't. So my focus was more on the UK universities.
Yeah.
And it just so happened that in my area, the field that I was interested in, which was chip design,
Mhm.
there were only like a handful of choices, like universities that were good. So I applied for all of them, and then I got all of them. And the funny story about the Cambridge one is even funnier because they actually got my address wrong. My address,
Mhm.
they actually got it wrong. So I never received any correspondence. So my scholarship funders came to me and asked me, so how was the Cambridge application? And I told them that, I sucked so badly, they didn't even bother to, respond to me. They didn't even send me a rejection. They just ghosted me. Right? Then they were like, no. Give them a call and find out what happened to your application.
Okay.
Right? So I picked up the phone, called the UK, and
Yes.
checked lah. Right?
Okay.
So what happened to my application? Then they looked, the graduate office looked it up and they're like, oh, you got in. I was like, what? Can you please fax it to me? Right? Because at the time it was fax, right? So,
Oh my god.
so I got them to fax it to me, and when they faxed it to me, that's when I noticed that they got my address wrong. They
Wow.
missed out one of the number.
Wow.
The number at the jalan, the jalan at the end got a number. They missed out that number, so it actually went to somewhere else. So then
Wow.
we went, so my family and my parents and I, we went over to this house,
Yeah.
knocked on the door, and maybe a neighbor somebody who lives on a different street, right? Because the number was missing, right? This on different street, and all my correspondents were there. Then the person very nicely kept everything. Because this person said that he knew that this is, you can see it's a University of Cambridge logo, right? So
Yeah.
it was like important lah. So he kept everything. So I got it. Thank the fellow very much, and all the correspondence was there, and that's how I started my journey to go to Cambridge.
Oh my god.
If I had missed that, right, I would just totally continue the rest of my life thinking that, I was so bad, I sucked so terribly that people ghosted me. They didn't even bother to reply.
A single phone call changed your life.
Yes,
Wow.
yes, that's the truth. Okay.
You said that you were gonna be like a very succinct, like I'll give close answers, but you are the most passionate interview. You're so smart. Oh my gosh, thank you, Shawn.
That's
Wow.
life, real life.
Yes,
Okay.
real life indeed. Wow. Oh, okay. And so you went there, and it was, well, I want to say a transformative experience. And in fact, I asked, Emma Davidson, your past president, before on another interview, well, what she felt, right, about this whole experience. I asked her about her fondest memories really at KTJ, and she constantly talked about the events that, KTJ does with the Oxford and Cambridge Society, of which you're the current president. So then, maybe with a slight touch of incredulity or like maybe a bit of like wonder right there, we say that it's a piece of paper, but at the same time, there are real experiences that are signified by that piece of paper right there in education. And so, when you think about it right there, would you say that education that you received at Cambridge was what we could fairly call a transformative education?
I can only speak of it from my perspective as a graduate student.
Yes.
So I understand that the undergraduate experience will be very different. Okay, but as a graduate student, The short answer to be succinct is yes, it transformed my life. All right. Why? Now the why is fairly simple. Um, because when I went to Cambridge, when or anybody goes to Cambridge, you end up being surrounded by a lot of very, very smart people as well.
Yes.
Right? So the university doesn't really need to do very much to push you. And there's a lot of peer pressure because everybody is trying, basically all chronic overachievers, right?
Yes.
So you get people who get there. So everybody's trying to like do their best. So you naturally push yourself to your limit, and that's exactly what I experienced. My 4 years there actually pushed me to my intellectual limit, so I actually know where that line is. I have a very clear, there is a line.
There is a line.
There is a line. Anything beyond this is just beyond me. Anything below that, simple.
I see.
Trivial
Fascinating.
stuff that I can handle, right? And ever since then, even after coming back and doing all the things that I do, I have not ever approached that line.
Fascinating.
All right. So that, in that sense, it transformed me in that sense because I now know and are well aware of where my line is.
Fascinating. Well, if you'd be willing to share, then what would you say that intellectual line is? Because like when we think about, well, a line very often, right? So then like that implies a boundary that we cannot possibly cross. But then at the same time, right, in some sense, you might say that prior to actually reaching that boundary right there, so then like we may not really know. So then, but you say what you said with deep conviction. So I'm interested to hear like what you mean by that.
Okay, the line is not an actual line you can draw on the sand, but it is sort of learning more about myself, knowing what my limits are, given the amount of resources that I have, i.e., given the amount of time you have in a day, the capability that I have to learn, right, and my existing knowledge base, right, there is a line.
There's a line.
There is a line, right? Because even if I work and I work really hard, right? I spent a lot of time working on my PhD. When I finished, my external examiner actually told me that I did enough for 3 PhDs, right? So I actually did a lot of work, so worked really hard. But even working so hard, I only managed to get like so far. I'm not like Einstein or anything. I'm like only there. So I know that, okay, even if you give me 24 hours in a day, I work 24 hours in a day, the nature of the problems, depending on the problem, the nature of the problems are such that if certain problems I encounter certain kind of problems, that's it. I'm just only going to be able to do this much. Because there are only 24 hours in a day.
I see. Okay.
Right. So that's effectively it.
Well, if that were the case, then I would then ask, right? So then, amongst the range or variety of human beings, then like considering like the individual differences of people right there, I mean like the problems that you speak of the kind that can be resolved with say an individual with the correct disposition and correct training, perhaps a natural endowment if we speak right there.
Okay.
Some people call it genius. You cited the example of Einstein earlier. He's cited as a genius. There's a lot more context to that. Or like, would you say that maybe it could be fair to say that some of the problems of which you are speaking at the moment are things that can inherently only be addressed if there is collaboration amongst people right there? I mean, when we think about intellectual pursuit, like usually it tends to be considered something that's very solitary. And I think that there's a part of that that is very true. Like when you try to study, well, you often find that it's very efficient to study like individually. But yeah, interested to hear your thoughts.
Okay, so again, I'm speaking from the context of a graduate student PhD. When you embark on this, if someone embarks on this PhD journey, it is an extremely solitary process. There is literally no collaboration because you are effectively competitors. Other people who are working in the same area as you are your competitors. If they publish before you, you are dead. Right? So in that sense, it's more competitive rather than collaborative. Right? But when I was saying what I was saying earlier about the nature of the problems is, there are many different kinds of problems in the world. Right? And that so if you do a PhD on something, right, many different kinds of problems in the world. So, but but the kind of PhDs that we do in, let's say, at Cambridge, are the kind of problems that no one else in the world knows about. So you are again the only person, or maybe the one of the handful of people in the world working on this problem, right? So again, it's very different from normal everyday life problems. Normal everyday life problems I classify them as trivial because for every single problem there is out there, the solution is known. It's just a question of implementation, right? Whereas the kind of problems that we're addressing at the PhD level is they're novel. The solutions are not known. And so you literally have to, and you're the only one in the world who is working on this, possibly. Even your supervisor has no idea how to help you, right? And so you take it on alone. And that's the reason why a lot of PhD students suffer clinical depression because of that kind of environment and scenario. Right? Imagine taking on a problem that no one in the world knows about. You're bashing your head against the wall, and you have to knock the hole through the wall. You have to break it down, and there's no one to help you. There's no support. And literally is, right? So that's just the way it is,
Fascinating.
right?
Okay.
So
fascinating. Well, thank you so much for sharing about that. And so let's now move further, across then to the time period when you had moved on from PhD back to Malaysia. You founded Aeste, and then you, I don't know when you updated your LinkedIn profile, but then you began to declare yourself a chip doctor at that point in time. So will you share with me, how Aeste was maybe, an expression really of some of the things that you had learned in school, and also, of course, some part of like the nature, right, that maybe the school had the opportunity to encounter, but may not necessarily have been directly and causally involved in shaping.
okay, all right. Then I have to tell a little bit about the history of Aeste first. All right. I founded Aeste when I was still in school. Right. My first commercial product when I came up with it in the late 90s. That was when I was still in high school. Right. So Aeste was actually founded as a vehicle for investment because I actually joined a business plan competition organized at that time. Nowadays it's very common to find all these kind of business plan competitions, startup, kind of hackathon kind of things. But at the time, this was like one of the first business plan competitions in Malaysia, and it was organized and run by McKinsey. They were called it Venture 2001, right? So I founded Aeste as a quote unquote vehicle in case I win, right? And this is me being a bit like I guess overconfident as well, but why? Because the competition is open. It's not like special category for students or whatever. No, it's open. Everybody in the region to sign up and join, and they had like 2,000 participants, and I turned out in the top 10. I ended up in the top 10. So that was a big surprising thing in a way. I didn't join hoping to win. I was just I was still a student. I was just joining to gain experience and learn. Right? And we ended up in the top 10. Okay, and so that company was founded for that purpose. Unfortunately, it was year 2001. Right, so it was just a post.com bubble burst, like 2000, right? Just shortly after, and all these funds, all these VC funds, and all were very, hesitant. They're not willing to invest. So therefore although the company was already founded and there were no investments coming in, I just kept it around. I kept it around until I came back from university. And decided to, okay, since now I'm back, let's do something with this. And so then I started this company, and started in the sense of actively going all in. In a way, sailang. I cashed out all my savings and threw it all in. Right? And I went all in on this company. And then what did I want to do? I'm first and foremost an engineer. I've always wanted to be an engineer, and I am still an engineer. Okay? So, engineer first. Okay, so I'm a terrible businessman. Right? I'm not an entrepreneur. I don't call myself an entrepreneur. I'm just an engineer. So I wanted to offer my services effectively. My services to do whatever that I know how to do, because I've learned I've got this huge corpus of like knowledge and skills over the years. hardware also can do, software also can do, all these kind of things. Everything also can do. So I was like, okay, I'm going to do this. And I went all in and I did this. So then I grew that business up.
Wow, fascinating. Okay. So yeah, like it's very much well staying true to yourself, but then like somehow finding a route right there.
So, so to answer a bit more of your question of how Cambridge has shaped me, it did shape my views on doing business. Right? Because while I was at Cambridge, I don't. If you can check the map lah, engineering department is directly opposite business school. Right, so Trumpington Street, opposite you have the engineering department and then Judge Business School. So Judge Business School will organize all kinds of like all these talks and events. Basically all kinds of, almost like I think twice a week or something like that. There are a bunch of them, right? So and being a poor PhD student, right, I also go there for makan lah, free makan. Right, that's the dinner. That's the dinner for the day. All right.
Yeah.
But I attended a lot of these talks, and that shaped my perspective on what a business is supposed to be. Right? So, and I understood that not everybody needs to get VC funds. Not every company should aim to be a unicorn. Different people have different goals.
I see.
Right? So the pitch that you often hear is it better to have a small slice of a big pie, or the whole pie but a small pie?
Yeah.
Right? The correct answer to that question is it depends on the surface area. The small slice of the big pie could be smaller than the entire pie, a small pie on its own. Right? So that has shaped my thinking in the sense that, okay, I started this company by going after venture funds. I've done that. I've gone through that whole experience, that whole cycle, the whole cycle of knowing that, okay, this thing has certain people, it applies to certain people, but it doesn't necessarily apply to me because it doesn't jive with my goals. I do not want to be a Mark Zuckerberg. I do not want to be a billionaire. I have very modest goals. Right? So hence, my approach to Aeste has always been, okay, small company, SME kind of thing, small business, as long as it makes me enough money for me to have my life, a good life, and that's it. And so I shaped it that way. I turned down business. I can tell you, I literally turned down business. Business come to me, people come to me, the multi-million-dollar project, whatever. I'm like, no lah, no thank you lah. Not my thing, not my cup of tea. I'll do the other one, the smaller one. That's my approach because, like I say lah, it's better to have, in my opinion, better to have the whole slice of the small pie than a tiny, puny little slice of a $1 billion pie.
Thank you so much for that. It's funny because your attitude is kind of similar almost to your nephew Gerald. Dr. Shawn right here is the uncle of one of Malaysia's Harvard 2025, also past student of mine, Gerald Chiang. And I can see like the way that your like face just started beaming up like that. I can see that like pride like unconsciously coming out.
Influence.
Wow. So like I guess like yeah, like one of the reasons why I raised that is that he had mentioned, I asked him yesterday, well, yesterday I was at an event at Dainagara and I had know that he was doing an internship there. So one of the questions I asked him during our lunch together was basically, yeah, I mean like you went to Harvard or you're going to Harvard, you want to take over the world? He was like, no, stuff of that nature right there. And the line of thinking actually was, shall we say, kind of similar to yours in a way. And I'm actually wondering, right, but what do you feel that family life was like for you, and how do you feel that that might have, I guess, like shaped the way that you ended up making all those choices in the world?
In my case, definitely family had influence, right? Because again, I don't come from wealthy family. I come from very typical, like prototypical civil servant family. Right, my dad's a clerk, government clerk. My mom's a government primary school teacher. Right, so that kind of background, right? So growing up, it's always been drummed into me that education is important. Right, it is your chance to move up social mobility in life. And it's also been drummed into me that every generation should do better, try to do better than the previous generation, right? So my mother especially had a huge influence and to shape me into thinking that I should set targets that are high, right? And that's how I approach things lah. And she was also the one who was the main person to push me to do computers as well when I was young, really young, right? So definitely in that sense, it started everything. Let's put it that way, lah. If you want to quote the Steve Jobs quote of joining the lines, the dots, joining the dots backwards,
Connecting the dots.
Connecting the
You
dots.
cannot see the.
You can't connect dots forward, you can connect them backwards. Right? You want to see where I am today and draw that like line, it goes back to family. I was lucky enough to be blessed to have my parents who cared about this kind of things and sort of put me on the right path and a good start. Right? Even though they didn't know much about these things. They don't even know what is computer science at that time, no? They don't even know what it has computer science, what is that? So, but they decided to put me on that path, and then I embraced it, and they gave me the necessary tools to, for example, self-learn from a very young age, and boom, 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 just carry on. So it's in a way, there's a multiplying effect.
Wow. I'm sure that your entire family is like very proud of you. So wonderful. That's incredible. So, but now I'd like to talk about a different sort of family, almost. So then, in fact, this is something that, like, well, Miss Davidson, your previous president, had spoken about how the Oxford and Cambridge Society of Malaysia had essentially become a sort of family for her in the time that she had essentially come from the UK over to Malaysia right there. Friends and lots of different things right there. But I'd like to hear your take. What has, well, that family been like for you?
Okay, I don't want to speak on behalf of Emma, but I think her perspective will be very different because, like you said, she came from outside, right? She's a foreigner who came in. So you imagine you come to a new country, you don't know anybody. Where do you start, right? So that is a good place to start because you would at least get to meet people with shared experiences and, in a quote unquote way, some shared values as well, right? So that's a good place to start. But me, I'm local, right? So coming into this, it's not my family in that sense. The society has provided me access to people who, as again, share similar values and similar views on certain things. Right.
Okay.
Like for example, obviously everybody who went to Oxford and Cambridge cares about education. Because if you're not a chronic overachiever, you can't get there. Right? That kind of thing. So there are certain, and then everyone shares this passion for learning, right? Lifelong learning kind of thing, where they really care about learning something, understanding it properly. So whenever I meet up with my friends from Oxford or Cambridge, I always tell my wife, whenever I meet up with them for whatever, makan, minum or whatever, right? Somebody's party, birthday party, go there, just chit chat, right? I walk away feeling like I've learned a lot. Right, because of the kind of topics that people talk about, right? The kind of things issues that they address, and I'm like, oh, I learn new things. So and that makes me happy because I like learning new things.
Yeah.
Right. So so in that sense, it has been very useful, lah.
Yeah. Right. Wow. And you certainly have had a very illustrious history, really, of your like past presidents. Now, if I were to just think really about the kinds of people that you have on your committee, you have, for example, Miss Elizabeth Lee, if I'm not wrong. And yeah, you've got also like a whole list of people like Mr. Alan Ng as well, and also Mr. Daniel Rahman. And if we look at the history of your past presidents as well, I believe that Tun H.S. Lee was essentially the very first president of your society right there. And so, well, again, sorry to go back to Emma slightly right there, but she had mentioned that essentially it's a place where you cannot really like rule from the top because of the nature of the people within it. And you come essentially along a line of very distinguished people, right? Like some people who are literally what you might call historical figures, if ever the history books might essentially end up writing about them.
They are in history books. Some of
They
them
are
are.
history
They
books.
are. Yes.
Like Tun H.S. for example.
Yes, right.
Well, that's someone else that I missed.
Yeah. Basically, yeah.
Okay, fine. So people who are in history books. So as you kind of think about, well, that legacy right here and what you're doing right now in your capacity as president, right? So then, I guess, what are you currently doing to, I guess, like bring that sort of like spirit to, I guess, to a wider audience? And what do you think that you'd like to do as you kind of push that legacy forward into the future and for future generations?
What you say is correct in the sense that our society has a very illustrious list of alumni, right, including past presidents. And something that a lot of people may not know is that our society is actually older than Malaysia. We were founded in 1960. Malaysia only came into being in 1963.
Yes.
Right, so we are technically older than the country. Right, so there is a lot of legacy, a lot of weight in the sense on the shoulders, so to speak. Right. So in that sense, I am also cognizant of this fact, and for me, on my personal basis, I just want to make sure that I don't screw things up so that we get disbanded by our head. Let's not do that. All right. So let's just make sure it survives.
They should survive.
Survive long enough to pass on to the next.
Hashtag blast, hashtag blast, hashtag blast. Survive, survive.
Survive. Okay.
Wow.
I always keep that in mind at the back of my mind whenever we do things. So exactly like what you mentioned just now. It is not a rule by dictatorship kind of society or committee, because just due to the nature of the kind of people we have in there, everyone in there are like top performers in their fields anyway, right? So it's very distributed in that sense, very delegated, right? And you do whatever you want, right? And it's quite independent because everybody, they are happy to run their own events, they're happy to build do their own things, right? And we come together just to share some of the responsibility and to make sure things can be done in a bigger way, right? Right. As to how I see it potentially impacting the larger community, I would have to say that our impact, we don't really have that much direct impact on the general society in Malaysia, right? We have a lot of direct impact on our members, of course.
All right.
Yeah, our members, of course, right? So, and through our events, that's pretty clear. Like, for example, we would often have like talks, all kinds of talks, right, where we invite speakers potentially from overseas, right, and then they would speak on various topics that are interesting, right, intellectually stimulating kind of things.
Yeah. I saw like a couple. Like for example, you guys invited Kyrie Jamaluddin. For example, you also invited, amongst other things, Professor Jomo, who was your very first speaker. Then there were a range of very interesting individuals out there.
Yep. In fact, we try to steer clear of politicians in general. Only because we want the society to remain alive in the future. We don't want to get deregistered by our in case the topics are too controversial, for example. Alright, so but yeah, we do have some politicians, and like for example, you mentioned like Kyrie. He's always a good sell in the sense that he's got that charm, and he is one of our alumni as well. Right, so straightforward. But we also like to have events, for example, with the various ambassadors and embassies. Right, again, that is also to build more understanding of things. Like earlier this year, we had an event with the Brazilian ambassador at the embassy, because that's not one of those common embassies that ambassadors or whatever that you see around. Usually you will see like the British ambassador, people like that. But we also try to reach out to the other embassies as well. And we had one event with the Brazilian one, and where we learned very interestingly, and this is again something I think is very interesting and useful to think about, is that Brazil and Malaysia shares a lot of history actually. Because we were both colonies of, we both had Portuguese, Dutch, and around the same time. So there were a lot of things that, a lot of policies that those people implemented, those colonial powers implemented in Malaysia, Malacca, whatever, and similarly were implemented in Brazil as well. So there's a lot of shared history. And yeah, so the event was talking a lot about that, and including a very sensitive topic of the theft of rubber, because it's from Brazil. Malaysian rubber is actually from Brazil. Yes. But yeah, so there are all kinds of things that we do that, like I said, directly impacts our members because number one, they would learn interesting things. They'll get to meet interesting people, build useful networks potentially. But our impact directly on the Malaysian public at large, I think is less so. Except mainly through our outreach events. So, and that's something that we are very passionate about because all of us, I said, we are all chronic overachievers in school. So everybody, top school student kind of thing. So we like school, we like education. And so our outreach events actually is the one that actually touches the average Malaysian directly. Right? We have a bunch of these kind of events, engineering workshops, debate competitions, English language. Like I just finished judging an essay competition last week, right? We have
So Sunway Cambridge essay competition.
correct, the English language essay competition. The essays, some of them were awesome. There was one that I read and I was like, oh, I would pay money to read this, man. Right? These are kids from like the normal schools. Right? They have all kinds of schools. They have like, of course, some international schools, they have some private schools, but they also have a lot of like normal government SMK kind of schools. So that's the one that we really target, like we really focus on for the general public.
Fascinating. Okay, so it sounds like there's like a lot of engagement along the way. Well, okay, wonderful. So I guess, well, when you think then about, well, the outreach that you're doing right now, right? What do you feel would be some, I guess, like desirable, if maybe indirect impacts of like some of the things that you are doing right now for our society at large, even though it may not, even though the Oxford Cambridge Society might not, like say, directly drive things to happen right there.
In my personal view, I think the best thing you can do for this country is to basically help the future generation. I think it's the future generation that we need to rely on, the younger generation. So that's the ones that we need to focus on, try to give them different perspectives, right? Not so much trying to tell them what to do, right? But just to give them different perspectives, give opportunity to see things differently.
Yes.
And so that's what we try to achieve from our outreach events as well.
Wonderful.
Including during the summer months when the students come back, right? They will also be running a series of outreach programs all around the country, especially talking to secondary school students about what life is like in Oxford, Cambridge, and stuff like that. Right?
Okay. Well, that's wonderful. I hope that whatever that aspiration in highest form might be, that it will come to pass and we will have a stronger, more resilient next generation. Thank you so much, Shawn. Well, when you think then about, I guess, your involvement in multiple fields right here, so like when you reflect upon your journey, right, and I guess also the development, right, of technology really in our society kind of going forward right here, I guess, well, what are some of the immediate thoughts that come to mind when you think about the future?
I think that in the future, everyone needs to understand technology well. All right. In the last generation, you can say that technology was basically the purview of a small group of people who were interested and working in it, right? But now that technology has basically, they touch every aspect of our lives, everybody needs to understand it, build a basic understanding. Okay, and when I say understand it, I don't mean like learn how to use it. I mean learn how it works, right? And then you can use it better. That's the idea, lah. So I always feel that I've always felt that it's important for all kids to learn programming. Right? I don't expect everyone to excel at it. I don't expect everyone to be able to do it. But it's one of those skills that it's good to understand the basics. It's like math, right? Everybody should know math. Whether or not how much you use in your daily life, that's a separate issue. But you should actually at least have basic math skills. Otherwise, you won't be able to navigate the world. And in the future, computing knowledge, in the sense of like how computers work, and the easiest way to learn that is via programming. That will be, I put that in the same category, lah. I think you won't be able to navigate the world without knowing it.
Okay. A much more narrow question then. What are your thoughts on AI technology, particularly generative AI in the modern age? do you feel that it is materially different from any technology that had come in the past generation, in the sense of being a complete paradigm shift? To what extent such a paradigm shift, has transpired? And yeah, what would it mean to understand the world of AI, which is coming up in our generation?
My perspective on AI is not so mainstream lah. Right? Mainstream, a lot of people are very hyped about it, very excited about it, thinking that it'll change the world. My perspective is that no lah, it won't change the world. Our world is still gonna be largely the same. Right? Why? I just take the example of, let's say, the job of a software engineer. Right? And this is one of those fields that are being highly focused on by generative AI. Right? Because everyone is from that field. Right? Does the nature of the work change? No, because you still need to understand client requirements. Still need to develop the code, and you still need to test the code, and you need to iterate. The nature is still the same. The only thing that's changed is the tools. So like I always like to use this example when I speak to other people about, like, in the past. If let's say you're doing software programming, when you don't know something, you're trying to solve a problem, what do? You go Google for it. Right? You Google for it, and then you get a list of sites, and then you probably pop onto Stack Overflow to look at some of the answers, and then you study, and you're like, oh, okay, fine. Right? And then you pick one, and then you implement it. Right? So that process is still basically that, even with generative AI. The only difference now is that maybe you don't Google for it. You don't use Google anymore. You might use whatever ChatGPT, Gemini, whatever tool that you have access to, right? And you use it, and it gives you some, plausible answers, and which you cannot always trust.
Oh yes.
Because generative AI has hallucination problems, right? So you still have to look at it, review it, see whether, oh, okay, it makes sense, and then only you use it, right? So that process, the nature is still the same. The only difference that I see is that filtering. When you use Google, it presents you like 10 sites. You have to then pick filter. Like, okay, half of it may be relevant, the other half may be completely nothing to do with the question you're trying to ask, right? Whereas if you use like a generative AI tool like ChatGPT or something, it helps you to filter that. So it speeds up that process. But the nature of the process is still the same. So the way I see it is, if the nature of the work is still the same, then what has fundamentally changed? Nothing. It's just a better tool. So instead of, like farmers, instead of using like, the ox and the hoe or whatever it is, now you have automated farming machines. You still farm,
Okay.
right? You still need to put fertilizers, still need to put water, still need to do things, right?
Fair.
So nature is still the same, just that you've got better tools.
Fair. Now, I'd like to challenge you slightly on that, by citing the specific example of, well, the car park attendant. Now, the car park attendant, by like the boom gates that you used to see right there, whereby the person would just be constantly collecting payment, so to speak. Or if not just like the car park attendant, then maybe like the people at like the toll booths right there. Once upon a time, when you drove across like the Gesas Highway, LPP kind of thing, there'll be at least 4 or 5 people, that kind of thing, like in the booths. Now, they had certain tasks that they needed to do to receive money or whatever have you right there. But then as time went by, then those tasks essentially were replaced as the automation basically became, well, more efficient, encompass a wider scale of tasks right here. Now, the performance of AI is something that is non-decreasing in scope, in the sense that basically over time, well, you will not be able to pull back Pandora's box contents back into Pandora's box because they have gone out into the world. And so when you think about, say, software engineering and like a whole bunch of like, say, other things right there, perhaps there are certain tasks that are associated with that. And do you imagine that it is inevitable in every universe timeline that we would have a continued role for human beings in a world where automation is a constant possibility?
To first use your specific example of the toll booth, until today you still see people at the toll booth.
Right.
Let's say that the toll has like the plaza has like 10 booths, right?
Yes.
They've automated a lot of it. They got like RFID card, smart tag,
Right.
whatever. But you still have that last 2 or 3 where there's someone sitting in there. Because there's still always a need for that. Right? That you're not going to be able to automate everything. One. Number 2, and this is a very important thing to remember, you can't sue an AI. An AI can't be held liable for its quote unquote suggestion or this, right? So there's only so much that an AI can ever be. Until the day you can actually have AI personhood, right, a legal personhood, i.e., somebody who can sue and be sued, it will forever remain a tool. You will always need a human to basically take responsibility. Yes. In case anything goes wrong,
I see.
someone you can take the part.
I see.
Right? So that is and in fact that is one of the interesting topics that I actually wanted to do for my masters in law.
Yes.
That is to try to figure out this problem of who to sue.
Yes.
Because in the example that I always like to give people is self-driving cars. When a self-driving car kills somebody, who do you sue? The driver who wasn't driving because the car was self-driving. The car company who makes it, but the car company will be like, ooh, are they liable? If they are liable, then they open a whole new can of worms, It's like, no, they just make the car, they certify because all the certification is fit for driving, liability lies in the person. Like now, like when you drive a car, if you knock something, the car company is not being sued. The driver gets sued, right? So that's a very I would say it's a slightly open question. We should probably make a good research topic for trying to figure out what are the precedents, the way law works, you got to have precedents, like examples and how to actually then decide what is the right thing to do.
Wow, I can see the mind at work right there.
All right, so that's one of the topics that I will talk about. It's like fun topic to tackle.
Okay. And I'm tremendously honored to have such an incredible and inspiring mind right here. Thank you, Dr. Shawn, for your wonderful sharing. And yeah, like I wish you a continued lifetime of eternal exploration. And for all we know, who knows, maybe that line of which you spoke may be a little bit further off and we don't know quite where it exactly is. Thank you so much.
Okay.
It's wonderful.
Thank you for having me again.
Thank you so much.